The horse came down the trade road at a steady walk, reins loose, no rider in the saddle, and Warren Hawkins nearly dropped his cider when he saw her. She was leading the animal by the bridle with one large hand, and every head at the edge of the Kettlemarch Harvest Fair turned to watch her come. Not because of the horse Warren's bay gelding, Copper, the one he had tied to a post that morning only to find missing when he came back from the grain merchant, but because of the woman walking beside it. She was tall, taller than most men Warren had served beside in 3 years of border campaigns, and those had been big men, soldiers hardened by the Stoneback War. Her skin was the deep olive green of river moss in summer, and her dark hair was pulled back from her face in a heavy braid that fell over one shoulder. She wore fitted riding leathers, dark brown, tooled along the seams with a pattern of running wolves that hugged every line of her, a laced leather bodice over a dark shirt whose sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and tall boots with iron buckles. A short sword hung at her left hip, and a sling of tools crossed her back. A farrier's hammer, a cold chisel, a set of hoof nippers. Her jaw was strong, her lower canines just long enough to catch the autumn light, and her amber eyes moved over the fairground with calm, deliberate attention, reading everything and giving nothing away. Warren saw her face the moment she saw his, and for just a fraction of a breath she went very still, the way a hawk does before it decides whether to land or fly. Then she walked straight toward him, leading his horse, and said, "This yours?" "Yes." He cleared his throat. "Where did you find him?" He did not need finding. He was standing in the middle of the north road, favoring his left forefoot. She stopped in front of Warren and looked him over the same way she had looked over the fairground, thorough, unimpressed, measuring. The left front shoe was half off. A nail had worked loose. Another quarter mile and he would have been lame. Warren looked at Copper's left front hoof. There was a new shoe on it, bright iron, set clean and tight, the clinched nails flush along the wall. Not a quick patch, a proper fit, shaped and cooled and nailed by someone who knew the work. He looked up at her. "You shod him." "Out there on the road. I had the tools." She said it simply, the way someone says the sky is gray, no boast in it. Warren stood there in the autumn crowd of Kettlemarch with the smell of roasting pork and spilled ale around him, and he felt a strange sensation he had not felt in a long time, the particular kind of gratitude that has nothing to do with politeness and everything to do with the fact that something you quietly love has been saved. "What do I owe you?" he asked. She looked at him steadily. "Nothing. That is not how it works. It is how it works when the horse did not deserve to be lame." She handed him the reins, held his gaze for one more moment with those amber eyes, and then turned and walked back into the crowd. Warren stood holding Copper's reins with the new shoe gleaming in the autumn sun and watched her go. He did not know her name. He did not know where she had come from. He knew only that she had gone to the trouble of pulling her tools off her back on a public road, pulling and refitting a shoe for a horse that did not belong to her, and that she had done it without asking anything in return. He had been in Kettlemarch for 3 days, setting up his stall and selling the last of the season's supply: rope, treated leather, horse goods, the things a former cavalry sergeant could make and sell now that the war was done, and he was trying to be nothing more than a working man with a small yard and honest hands. He had a single room at the Buckwheat Inn. He ate alone. He spoke to people across a counter and said thank you and counted coin and went back to his room. He had not thought about another person the way he was thinking about her right now in a very long time. It took him exactly 15 minutes to find her again, which felt like a small mercy from whatever gods managed such things in this world. She was at the far end of the craft row, crouching beside a wagon wheel and talking to an old drayman whose face was creased with worry. She had one hand on the wheel's hub and she was explaining something, slowly and clearly, and the old man was nodding. Warren waited. He did not want to interrupt. When she stood and the drayman shook her hand with both of his, Warren stepped forward. "I did not get your name," he said. She turned, and there was something in her expression that was not quite surprise and not quite amusement, something between the two. "No, you did not. I'm Warren Hawkins." A pause. "Morag Ironhide," He held out his hand. She looked at it, then at him, then shook it. Her grip was exactly what he expected, sure and unhurried and strong enough that she could have crushed every small bone in his hand if she had chosen to. She did not choose to. "Can I buy you a meal?" he asked. "Not as payment, just as a courtesy. I was about to eat." "I have not yet eaten," she said, as though this were simply a fact to be weighed. "Then eat with me." She studied him for a moment, and Warren had the feeling he was being read the same way she had read the fairground, quickly, completely. He stood still and let her read him, because he had nothing to hide that mattered. "All right," she said. They ate at one of the long trestle tables outside the inn, with the fair noise around them and the sky going gold over the hilltops. And Warren found out that Morag Ironhide was a journeyman farrier by trade and a wandering one by preference, traveling the autumn circuit of harvest fairs and market towns from the Stoneback Range down to the lowland trading towns and back again. She shod horses and mended ironwork and fixed wagon axles and fixed wheel rims, and she did it well enough that she never wanted for work even in places where people looked at her the way Kettlemarch was looking at her now, sidelong, stiff, some faces open with curiosity and some closed with something harder. Warren noticed the looks. He suspected she was used to ignoring them. "How long have you been on the circuit?" he asked. "For years," she said. She tore bread without looking at it. "Before that I was with the Ironhide clan. Before that I was learning the trade from my father." She glanced at him. "You have the posture of a soldier." "Former," he said. "How former?" 2 years. He looked at his cider. "I was cavalry, 3rd Border Regiment, Stoneback campaigns." Something moved behind her eyes at that. The Stoneback campaigns had been fought against orc clans on the eastern range, and the 3rd Border Regiment had been part of it. Not the worst of the incursions, not the massacres, but the hard, grinding years of patrol and skirmish and reprisal. Warren had not been proud of all of it. He was not proud of all of it now. "I know what regiment that was," she said, level. "Then you know I came home and decided I was done with it," he said. "I am not that anymore." She looked at him for a long time. He let her. "You are very easy to read," she said finally. "I was told I was a bad liar even before the war. The war did not improve that." She made a sound that was almost a laugh, a small, rough thing, like a branch cracking, and went back to her food. He thought that was the end of it. He thought she would finish eating and stand and say something polite and walk away, and he would watch her go the same way he had watched her go the first time, and that would be the whole story of Morag Ironhide in his life. An afternoon at the Kettlemarch Fair, a new shoe on his horse, a shared meal. He was wrong about that in every particular. The river warning came at sundown. The Kettlemarch Fair was held on the broad flat plain just south of the Ketter River, which came down from the northern highlands, and this time of year was high with autumn rain and snowmelt. It had been high for a week, according to the locals, who had been watching it with the practiced worry of people who lived near water and knew what it could do. The town's water reader, an old woman named Hesta, who read river levels with a marked post and 40 years of experience, had been telling the fair committee all week that the north tributaries were running dangerous, and the fair committee had been telling her not to worry because the fair was good for the town's economy, and the autumn floods hadn't come this early in 20 years. Then the north tributary broke its bank. The shout came from the river watch first, a long horn blast from the ridge above the plain, and then the shout went through the fairground like fire through dry grass. Flood coming. The Ketter is rising, and 5,000 people and 2,000 animals and several hundred stalls and tents and wagon loads of goods all began to move at once in a direction that was generally away from the river but not always wisely away from the river, because panic does not always choose the best route. Warren was at his stall when the horn sounded. His first thought was Copper, who was in the paddock at the east end of the fair. His second thought, arriving so quickly after the first that it was almost simultaneous, was Morag, who had said she was staying in her wagon at the south end of the fairground. He got Copper first because Copper was faster and more expensive to replace than his own dignity. The paddock was already chaos, horses pulling at their tethers, a few already loose and moving in frightened circles, handlers trying to manage animals that outweighed them by a factor of 5. Warren pushed through, got Copper's lead rope, got him moving and out through the paddock gate and turned him south, away from the river. The river was not yet visible. It was audible. A low, deep sound, not like a rush or a roar but like something much older and heavier. The sound of an enormous amount of water deciding that the banks it had been politely contained within were now someone else's problem. Warren tied Copper to a merchant's wagon that was already moving south on the high road, knowing the horse would pull free if he had to, and ran back into the fairground. He found Morag Ironhide in the middle of a different kind of problem. Her wagon, a solid, well-made thing, loaded with her forged tools and her portable bellows, and the iron stock she carried for on-site work, was mired. Not from the flood, not yet. One of its rear wheels had sunk into a soft patch of ground that the fairground's heavy foot traffic and the morning's rain had turned to something close to mud, and the wheel was in past the hub. The horse she used for the wagon, a sturdy brown cob, was pulling with everything it had and going nowhere. Around Morag, 3 men who had stopped to watch were offering commentary. Not help commentary. "Going to lose that rig, Greenblood," one of them called. A stocky man in a merchant's coat, already backing away from the direction of the river. "Should have set up on the high ground if you didn't know the plain." "Leave it," another said to him. "Not our problem." Morag had her shoulder against the wagon's side and was pushing, her boots deep in the mud, her face set with the particular expression of someone who is going to solve a problem through sheer force of will or die trying. The wagon did not move. Warren looked at the wagon. He looked at the men. He looked at the mud. "You 3, he said to the watching men, making his voice carry the way you learned to make it carry when you needed soldiers to move immediately and without argument. All 3 looked at him. "Get on the back wheel, push, now." The tone worked better than the logic. They moved before they thought about it, which was what he was counting on. He took his place beside Morag. She glanced at him with something sharp in her expression that he could not stop to read and said, "Pull when I say." She turned back to the wheel and braced. "Together," he said to the men on the back wheel. "On 3, 1, 2, 3. They pushed and she pulled and the cob strained and the wagon ground and stuck and ground again and came out of the mud with a sucking, indignant lurch that nearly put Warren on his face. He caught the wagon's side and steadied himself. Morag was already moving, taking the cob's lead, climbing onto the driving seat. "Get on," she said to Warren. "I have my horse." "Your horse is on the south road. I saw you tie him to Jervin's wagon. Get on." There was no particular argument to be made against this. He got on. She drove the cob out of the fairground at a pace that suggested she knew exactly how much time they had, which turned out to be not much at all. The Ketter crested the eastern bank 20 minutes after they reached the south road, rolling gray-brown water across the lower fairground, taking stalls and a few abandoned tents, and a great deal of scattered goods with it. From the high road, Warren watched the water spread out across the flat plain below and felt the cold, quiet relief of someone who has gotten out ahead of something that did not care about him at all. Morag stopped the wagon on the high verge beside a row of other vehicles and sat still for a moment, her hands still on the reins, looking at the water below. "That was close," Warren said. "Yes." She looked at the fairground, what had been the fairground, now a shallow lake with tent poles sticking out of it. 2 days of work. He looked at her. Her profile was very still. The braid over her shoulder had come half undone in the scramble, and a dark strand of hair lay across her cheek. She did not push it away. "You'll rebuild the stall," he said. "The tools are safe." She said it the way she said most things, as a fact, without drama. But he heard something underneath it, a small thread of relief so carefully contained that he almost missed it. He thought about a woman who worked alone, traveling fair to fair with a wagon and a portable forge. And he thought about how much it would cost in time and coin to lose that equipment, and he understood that what she had just said was not a small thing. "I'm glad you got out," he said. She turned and looked at him. The amber of her eyes was very clear in the low evening light, and there was something in her expression that was quieter and more open than anything she had shown him since the road. "You came back for me," she said. "I noticed you were stuck." "You did not have to notice." "No," he agreed, "but I did." They looked at each other for a moment with the wet smell of flood water rising from the plain below and the last of the autumn sun going down behind the ridge. And Warren felt the same thing he had felt when he saw the new shoe on Copper's hoof, that particular, unguarded quality of something he had not expected. The fair committee, it turned out, had a contingency plan that had not been used in 23 years but was nonetheless written down somewhere, because the mayor of Kettlemarch was the kind of man who wrote things down. The fair would move to the upper common, a broad piece of ground on the hill above the town proper, and would resume in 2 days after the water receded and the damage was assessed. Traders and craftspeople who had lost goods or infrastructure would be compensated from the fair fund, a fact the merchant who had told Morag to leave her rig was now discovering at considerable personal cost, since he had abandoned his own wagon in the scramble, and the wagon had gone into the flood. Warren helped Morag get her wagon settled on the upper common that night, unhitching the cob and getting him picketed, checking the wagon's undercarriage for damage from the mired wheel. There was a cracked spoke in the left rear wheel that he found with his fingers in the dark, running his hand around the rim. "That spoke is cracked," he said. "I know." She was working by the light of a small lantern hung from the wagon's side. "I noticed it when we stopped. It will not fail before I can replace it. I can do it now if you have a spare." She looked at him across the light of the lantern. "You know wagon work." "I know most things that have to do with horses and the things that carry them," he said. "Spent 3 years keeping cavalry equipment running in the field. When you are far from town and something breaks, you learn to fix it." She studied him. "Spare spoke is under the wagon, wrapped in oilcloth." He found the spoke and replaced it in the dark by feel and lamplight, with Morag holding the lantern and occasionally handing him tools. She did not talk much. He had already noticed that she was comfortable with silence in a way that many people were not an uncomfortable silence, not the silence of someone with nothing to say, but the silence of someone who had long ago made her peace with her own company. He found to his mild surprise that he was comfortable in it too. "Where are you from?" she asked when he was tightening the last nail. "Millhaven, south of the Stoneback farming country." He paused. "Not much of it is mine. I have a work yard and a small stable. It is enough." "Enough for what?" He thought about it. "Enough to be quiet. You wanted quiet after the war. Very much." He stood and tested the wheel solid. "Good. Did you ever want quiet?" "I am always quiet," she said. "That is not the problem." She looked at the lantern. "The problem is that quiet for one is different from quiet for two." Warren stood in the dark with his hands still warm from the work and looked at her, and he thought he understood exactly what she meant. He thought she knew that he understood because she did not look away. He slept in his horse box that night, Copper's stall in the inn stable, where he had spread his bedroll because his room at the inn had been claimed by a family who had flooded out of the lower town. He slept well, which surprised him, and he woke up thinking about amber eyes and a new shoe on a horse he had not expected to see again. The upper common was a different kind of fair. Without the sprawling, organized rows of the main fairground, the stalls and wagons arranged themselves in the rough, organic way that people arranged themselves when they were mostly trying to get through a difficult situation and also sell things, which meant it was louder and more crowded in places and quieter in others. And the general mood was the chaotic warmth of people who had gotten out of something bad and were glad to be alive. The flood had not hurt anyone seriously. A few sprained ankles, one horse with a cut fetlock from debris, property damage significant enough to make the merchants loud and unhappy, but not enough to make anyone quiet and devastated. Morag set up her forge station at the edge of the common where there was stone ground for the bellows heat, and she was away from the tent canvas. Warren set up his stall 20 feet away, and this was not an accident. "You moved," she said when she saw him. "Better foot traffic over here," he said. She looked at him. He looked at the foot traffic, which was not notably better here than anywhere else. She made that small rough sound again, the almost laugh, and went back to her fire. He sold rope and saddle fittings and watched her work. She was extraordinary at it, not just competent but genuinely skilled, the kind of skill that was not about strength alone, but about knowing exactly where and how to apply it. A horse came in with a cracked hoof wall, and she assessed it in minutes, knew exactly what needed doing, worked with a quietness and economy that made the horse trust her without Warren ever seeing her try to make that happen. The horse just trusted her, the way horses trust people who know what they are doing. Between customers at his stall, he found himself watching her more than he watched the foot traffic. He was not subtle about it. He was not trying to be subtle about it. At midday she came to his stall and bought a length of saddle leather and did not quite meet his eyes when she paid for it, which he found oddly encouraging. "I need to ask you something," he said. She looked up. "After the fair ends you go south, yes, toward the Lowland Circuit?" "Yes. I go south too. Millhaven is south of Kettlemarch." He kept his voice steady and his hands flat on the counter. "The road through Dunnock Pass is narrow and it has been rough lately. There was a rock slide in early autumn and the surface is bad in places. I was wondering if you would like company on the road." He paused. "I am not a farrier, but I can mend a wheel and I know how to handle trouble on a road." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "The road through Dunnock Pass is fine. I have traveled it twice this season." "Oh," he said. "But," she said, "the valley road south of the pass is where the trouble has been. 3 merchants robbed in the last 2 months. She picked up her leather. Company on the valley road would be sensible." She walked back to her forge. Warren watched her go and noticed that she was, possibly, smiling. It was a small thing, not quite visible from the angle he had, but he thought he saw it. He decided that, yes, he had seen it. The next 2 days were the best 2 days Warren had spent in longer than he could quite remember. It was not that anything extraordinary happened, nothing did, by the standards of a man who had lived through the Stoneback campaigns. But there was a quality to the time that he noticed and wanted to examine carefully, the way you notice a light on in a house you had assumed was empty. He and Morag talked. Not constantly. There was still plenty of silence, comfortable and easy, but steadily, in the way 2 people talk when they are genuinely curious about each other and have not yet run out of things to be curious about. He learned that she had left the Ironhide clan at 22, after a disagreement with the clan chief about the terms of a marriage arrangement she had not agreed to, which she described with the same flat factual tone she used for everything, but which Warren suspected had not been a small or simple thing. She had taken her father's tools in her own 2 hands and made her own way, and she had been making her own way for 4 years and was, as near as he could tell, good at it. She was 26. He was 28. These felt, to Warren, like ages that were calibrated in a way that had nothing to do with coincidence and everything to do with the fact that they had both had exactly enough hard years to know what they wanted and exactly enough sense not to throw it away when it appeared. She learned that he had been good at being a soldier and had not wanted to stay one, and that he was not particularly good at being anything else but was working on it. She learned that he was fond of horses in the unshowy way of someone who had spent years depending on them for his life. She learned that he was not good at dancing. This came out at the fair's second night celebration on the Upper Common, where someone had brought fiddles and someone else had brought a drum, and the mood of surviving a flood had generated the kind of relief that expresses itself in noise and movement. He asked her to dance. She accepted. He lasted approximately 2 minutes before stepping on her foot. "I told you," he said. "You did not tell me," she said. She was not looking at his feet. She was looking at his face, and the expression she was wearing was one he was beginning to think was what Morag Ironhide looked like when she was happy, which was not what other people's happiness looked like. It was quieter, more contained, but it was there, a warmth behind the amber. "I should have led with that information," he said. "Yes, you should have." She did not step back, which meant they were still close, which meant he was extremely aware of the specific distance between his face and hers, which was less than it had been for most of the evening. You can compensate by standing still. Standing still is not dancing. It is close enough, she said. They stood in something that was not quite dancing and not quite standing still, and the fiddles played a reel around them, and the fairground lights made everything warm and unsteady, and Warren thought, with the precise clarity of a man who was not good at pretending things were not what they were, I am in a significant amount of trouble. He did not try to stop it. He was not sure he could have, and he was not sure he wanted to. On the last morning of the fair, Warren was loading his wagon when Aldrich Voss appeared at his stall. Aldrich Voss was the kind of man who appeared in every trading town and every fair merchant class, prosperous, the sort of prosperity that comes from being clever enough to get ahead and not clever enough to feel shame about how. He had a wide face and a wide belly, and a coat that was very good quality and very visible about being very good quality. He had lost his wagon in the flood because he had run and left it, and he was not in a good mood about this, and like many people not in a good mood, he was looking for someone to take it out on. He had apparently decided on Morag. Warren heard it before he saw it, not raised voices, because Morag did not raise her voice, but the particular quality of one man's voice when he is being deliberately unpleasant and enjoying it, the way some men do. Ought not be setting up here at all, Voss was saying, when Warren came around the end of his wagon. Greenblood farrier taking custom from proper craftsmen. You know what the guild rate is. You're underselling it by a third. That's not fair trade, that's, my rates are my own, Morag said. She was loading her tools into the wagon with systematic efficiency and not looking at Voss. Established by my work and my market, not the guild's fee table. I am not guild registered. No, you're not. Voss stepped closer. Behind him, two of his associates had stopped to watch, because the guild doesn't register greenbloods. Funny thing that. The guild doesn't register anyone who doesn't pay their fee, Morag said. That is a different issue. Is it? Voss's voice had dropped into the register that was supposed to be threatening. You know, there are towns on the South Road that don't let your kind set up at all. Not just the guild, the town charter. Greenblood vendors are a nuisance. Undercut prices, cause trouble, take up space that ought to go to Voss. Warren's voice came out even and flat, the voice he had used on men who needed to stop what they were doing. He stepped up beside Morag, not in front of her. She did not need him in front of her, but beside her, facing Voss. She is a licensed journeyman farrier with a fair permit. You have an issue with her fees, take it to the committee. You do not have an issue with her presence because she has as much right to this common as you do. Voss looked at him. And you are? Someone who watched her shoe my horse on the road when your wagon was sinking into the flood because you ran. He kept his voice exactly level. I do not recall seeing you push any wagons out of the mud, Voss. Voss's face had gone a particular color that was not quite red and not quite purple. His associates had gone quiet. The small group of onlookers who had gathered, and there were always onlookers at this kind of thing, in the way that there were always onlookers at anything, had gone very still. Voss said something that was technically a word but mostly an insult and walked away. Warren watched him go. Then he turned to Morag. She was looking at him with an expression he had not seen on her before, not gratitude exactly, because he already knew she was not the kind of person whose expression was gratitude, but something deeper than that and more complicated, the way you look at something that surprises you by being exactly what you needed without being asked. You did not have to do that, she said. I wanted to do that, he said. He picked up the tool sling she had set down and handed it to her. He was wrong. He was not saying anything I have not heard before. That does not make him right. She took the tool sling. Her fingers touched his when she did, and he did not imagine that neither of them moved immediately to break that contact. He did not imagine that her amber eyes were watching him with a quality of attention that was specific and warm and nothing like the measuring look she had given him on the road. Warren, she said. Yes. After the valley road. She looked down at the tool sling, then back up at him. Millhaven, what is there? A workyard, he said. A stable. A house that is too big for one person. He paused. The autumn fair in Millhaven runs 3 more weeks. It is smaller than Kettlemarch, but there is good horse trade. He paused again. And there is room at my place for a wagon and a forge setup if someone wanted to work the local circuit while the south roads go muddy. She looked at him with those amber eyes, and he looked back and did not flinch. That is a very practical offer, she said. I am a very practical person, he said. No, she said, with the small rough sound that was her laugh. No, you are not, but you are a good one. They traveled the valley road south together, and nothing robbed them, which Warren attributed partly to luck and partly to the fact that 2 people on the road, one of whom was 6 feet of armed orc with the posture of someone who would be very inconvenient to threaten, were a less appealing target than a lone merchant. The valley road was 3 days. They made camp each night on the verge, Warren's bedroll on one side of the fire and Morag's on the other, and they talked until the fire was low and then lay in their separate blankets in the comfortable silence, and the stars were extraordinary above the valley walls. On the second night, they talked about the war. Not in detail. Warren had talked about it in detail enough times to know that the detail was not the point, but about what it had been like to come back from it, which for him had been disorienting, and for her had been different in that she had not been a combatant but had known the clans caught between the campaigns, the families displaced, the years of disruption before the treaty. Your regiment, she said, not an accusation, a question. I followed orders I should have questioned, he said. I did not hurt people who were not combatants, but I was part of a thing that was larger than my piece of it, and I cannot always be sure that the larger thing was right. It was quiet for a while. The fire was low and orange. My father said something like that, she said. He had been in the border fights on the clan side years before. He said it is possible to be a decent person inside a bad situation and still come out with blood on you that does not wash clean. She paused. He did not mean it as a condemnation. He meant it as the cost of being honest about what you were part of. Yes, Warren said. That is exactly it. She looked at him across the fire. You are more honest than most soldiers I have met. Most soldiers I met were not honest either, he said. It seemed like a waste of time not to be. She made a sound, not the rough laugh this time, something softer, a breath that was not quite a sigh. You are a strange man, Warren Hawkins. Almost certainly. I do not mean it badly. I know. The third night she told him about the clan and the marriage arrangement and what it had taken to leave. It was not a quiet story. There had been a confrontation, a formal refusal, a period of being considered cast out before the clan elder, who was her father's sister, had quietly arranged for her to take the tools and go without shame. She told it the same way she told everything, with the flat factual tone, but Warren listened to what was under the facts and heard a woman who had refused to let anyone else make the central choices of her life, even when refusing cost her. What would the arrangement have been, he asked. A binding to a clan warrior 2 years older than my father, she said. A man with land and standing and 3 previous wives. Was that normal in clan custom? For some, not for mine. She poked the fire. My father had chosen my mother, it was permitted, but the new chief preferred the old ways. A pause. I preferred my father's way. Warren looked at the fire for a while. Then he said, What is your father's way? She looked at him. The fire was very low now. You find someone you want, she said, and you tell them and they tell you, and that is the whole of it. In the firelight, with the valley dark around them and the stars cold and clear above, Warren Hawkins said, That seems like a good way. She held his gaze for a long, specific moment. Yes, she said, it does. He reached across the low fire, not far, just enough, and put his hand on the ground beside hers so that their fingers were almost touching. Not quite. An offer, not a demand. She turned her hand over and closed it around his, and they sat like that in the dark with the fire going to coals, and Warren felt, with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire, that the world was considerably better than he had been giving it credit for. He had been alone for a long time. He had been alone so thoroughly and so carefully that he had started to mistake it for preference. He understood now, holding her hand in the dark, that he had been wrong about that, and that being wrong about it was the best thing that had happened to him in 2 years. Millhaven was a town of 400, which was not large but was large enough to have a market square, a grain mill, a tavern, and a smithy that was not a farrier's smithy, but was close enough to the workyard that the two operations could share certain equipment. Warren rode into town with Morag's wagon at his back and Copper's new shoe still shining on his left front hoof. The shoe she had put on in the road, which was holding beautifully, which he thought of every time he looked at it, and the way people watched them arrive was a version of the same watching that had happened at Kettlemarch, the sidelong looks and the calculations. Old Brennan Hale, who ran the smithy, came out and watched Morag climb down from her wagon seat with the frank appraisal of a craftsman evaluating competition. "Farrier?" he asked. "Journeyman," she said. "Good work?" he asked Warren. Warren held up Copper's left forefoot so Brennan could see the shoe. Brennan crouched and looked at the clinching and the fit and the angle of the nails, and he straightened up and nodded. "Good work," he said to Morag. "I do not do much farriery. Mostly wagon iron and plow repair. You would not step on my trade." "I know what trade I do," she said. "Then we will get along," he said. Warren's house was, as he had told her, too big for one person. It had been built by the previous owner for a family, and had rooms that Warren had no reason to enter, and now one of those rooms was given over to Morag's tools and the other to her bedroll, which she arranged with the same systematic efficiency she applied to everything. It was appropriate. They had not been together long enough for anything else, and both of them knew it, and both of them were not patient exactly, but honest about the difference between wanting something and being ready for it. The Millhaven Autumn Fair began on the 1st of Harvest Month and ran 3 weeks, as Warren had said, and Morag set up her forge station in the market square and worked it every day, and built a reputation with a speed that impressed even people who had come in prepared not to be impressed. Word spread the way it always spreads in small towns. One person tells another, another tells a third, and the quality of her work was its own argument against every objection. There was still objection. There would always be objection in a town that had been almost entirely human for 2 generations, and had a complicated border history. It expressed itself mostly in avoidance and in a certain quality of coolness from the older families, and in one instance in something more direct. A group of young men outside the tavern one evening who said things as Morag passed that were designed to be heard. Warren was there for that. He was not there because he had been following her or watching out for her. He had been coming out of the tavern himself, having bought a pot of stew to bring home. But he was there, and he turned toward the young men before Morag had done anything, and what he did was not a dramatic confrontation but something quieter. He walked to the one who had spoken, a broad young man named Dex, the miller's son, who was not particularly cruel but was the kind of person who said things in groups that he would not say alone, and he said, very quietly, "That woman shod my horse on the road when she did not have to. She pulled a flood wagon out of the mud when she did not have to. She works better than anyone in this market and she charges fair. I am telling you as a neighbor that I am going to remember what I just heard, and I am not a man who forgets easily." Dex looked at Warren's face. Then he looked at Morag, who was watching the whole exchange with the stillness of someone who has seen this kind of thing enough times to know how it usually goes and was calibrating whether this time would be different. Dex shrugged and went back into the tavern. Warren turned back to Morag. She was looking at him with the expression he had come to know by then, the deep, quiet, particular attention that she reserved for things that mattered to her. "You are going to keep doing that," she said. "As many times as it comes up," he said, "it will keep coming up. Then I will keep doing it." He held out the stew pot. "I bought 2 portions, in case you were hungry." She looked at the stew pot. She looked at him. Then she took the pot and said, "I am hungry," and they walked back to his house together in the dark. It was the evening of the second week when the thing happened that Millhaven would talk about for a long time afterward. It was market day, the biggest of the 3-week fair, and the square was full. Morag had a line of horses waiting. It was her best day yet. 6 animals booked in the morning and a 7th that had arrived unplanned with a thrown shoe. She was working the 7th, a big iron-gray stallion belonging to a horse dealer from out of town named Warren, who was new to Millhaven and new to Morag, and had spent the first 20 minutes of his wait making observations about orc craftwork that he seemed to feel were clever. The stallion was difficult. Not mean exactly, but spooked. A young animal, highly strung, and the noise of the market was getting to it. Morag had it mostly settled when Goran, either impatient or deliberately provocative, slapped the animal on the hindquarters to hurry it along. The stallion exploded. It reared, not a small rearing, a full vertical 1,200-pound rearing, and it was not the horse Morag was worried about. It was the small boy who had been standing behind the station watching the forge work with the oblivious interest of children who do not yet understand that large animals kicking can kill you. He was maybe 8 years old. He was directly in the path of the stallion's descending front hooves. There was no time for thinking. There was not even time for reaction in the ordinary sense. What happened was Morag moved with a speed that was simply not what a human body could have done, crossed the ground between her and the child in something that was less than a stride, and caught the stallion's foreleg on the way down. Caught it, with her bare hands. One hand closed around the cannon bone and held. The stallion weighed 1,200 pounds and was in a full rear and came down with everything it had into the grip of Morag Ironhide's right arm, and it stopped. The horse staggered. It did not land on the boy. Morag planted her feet in the dirt of the market square and held the leg braced long enough for the child to scramble backward, and then she let the animal down and stepped sideways and spoke to it in a low, continuous voice that was not entirely a language. Warren recognized something old, something from the clan tongue, a sound that was not so much words as it was a vibration. A calm thing poured directly into the horse's panic, and the stallion shook and blew and settled. The market square had gone completely silent, not the silence of a pause. The silence of several hundred people processing something they had just seen with their own eyes and were not entirely sure they had correctly understood. The boy's mother, who had gone white as chalk, stumbled forward and grabbed her son and held him so tightly that the boy made a sound of protest that was probably the most normal noise in the entire square at that moment. Goran, the horse dealer, stood with his mouth open. The hand he had used to slap the horse's hindquarters was still slightly raised. Old Brennan Hale, standing at the edge of the crowd, said, very slowly and with the voice of a man who had seen a great many things in 60 years and was honestly not sure where this one ranked, "Lord and River." Morag looked at the stallion, who was now standing with his head down and his sides heaving but completely still under her hand. Then she looked at Goran. Her voice, when she spoke, was exactly the same as it always was, flat, factual, unhurried. "Do not," she said, "strike a nervous animal." The market square held its silence for another breath. Then Brennan Hale started to clap. It was a slow, deliberate clap, the kind that means something. One person joined, then another, and by the time the crowd had fully resolved what they felt about what they had just witnessed, it was not silence anymore. Warren was standing 10 feet away when it happened. He had been watching the line, keeping the other animals calm while she worked. He had seen the whole thing, the rear, the movement, the catch, and what he felt in his chest at the end of it was something that defied simple naming. It was not fear, though it had started as fear. It was not simply relief. It was something close to awe, the clean, simple awe of watching someone do something that was exactly what they were built to do, at precisely the moment when it needed to be done. He crossed the square to her. She was still standing beside the stallion, her hand on its neck. He said her name, just that. Morag. She turned and looked at him with the amber eyes, and whatever she read in his face made something happen in her expression, a softening that she did not usually let the world see. Her right hand, the one that had caught the leg, was trembling slightly, not from pain, but from the dissipation of the force, the way a struck bell keeps vibrating after the blow. He took her hand in both of his and held it. She looked down at their hands and back up at him, and the square was still clapping around them, and Millhaven had just fundamentally revised its understanding of who was in their market, and Warren did not care about any of that at all. He only cared about the slight trembling in her hand and the fact that she had not pulled away. "You are all right," he said. "Yes." Her voice was slightly different from usual. Not shaken, Morag did not shake, but changed in some way, unguarded. "The boy is all right. Because of you, because I was there." "Yes," he said, "because you were there." He held her hand firmly. "Come home when you're done." She looked at him for a moment. Something moved through her face that was not quite the small, rough laugh and not quite the deep, quiet attention, but something that combined elements of both, warm and open and entirely her. "Yes," she said. That night she came home. Warren had a fire going and the stew pot on and the lamps lit, and when she came through the door, he had the particular awareness of a man in a room that has just gone from empty to full, and he thought that this was what the house had been waiting for, all those months and years of being too big for one person. She set her tool sling down by the door. She washed her hands at the basin. She sat at the table and he put a bowl in front of her and they ate together in the warm light of the lamp and the fire. After she said his name, "Warren," he looked up. "In Orc custom," she said, "there is a thing called the first naming." She looked at the table, then at him. It was, he realized, the first time he had seen her look anything close to uncertain. It is when someone tells another person that they are desired, chosen. It is considered binding. She paused. It is considered more binding than anything else. Warren was very still. "In my father's tradition," she said, "you do not wait for ceremony. You do not wait for negotiation or arrangement. You say the thing when it is true." She met his eyes. "It has been true for me since the road, since before the road possibly, since you walked back into the flood plain when you could have stayed on the high ground." The lamp was warm on her face. The fire was low behind him. The house, too big for one person, felt exactly the right size. "Morag," he said, "you do not have to let me speak." He leaned forward. "I lost a great deal of things in the war and I came back here, and I was trying to be satisfied with nothing, because nothing is easier than something and something can be taken away." He held her gaze. "You walked into Kettlemarch with my horse and a new shoe you put on him out of what looked to me like pure decency, and you handed me the reins and walked away, and I thought about it for 15 minutes before I went and found you, because I could not stop thinking about what kind of person does that. And now I know what kind of person does that. And I do not want to pretend I have been measuring this or holding back because it seems wiser." He reached across the table. "You are the most remarkable person I have met in my entire life. And you are the only person I have talked to in 2 years and not wanted to leave." He put his hand on the table, open. "I choose you. If you will have me, I choose you." She put her hand in his. She stood, he stood, and she was taller than him, and it did not matter at all. And when she kissed him, it was exactly what he should have expected from a woman who did everything with absolute certainty and not a single wasted movement. It was warm and deep and unhurried, and it did not taste like anything as simple as relief. It tasted like something beginning. He held on to her with both hands and she held on to him with both of hers, and the fire was warm behind them, and the night was cold outside, and the house was the right size. In Orc custom, the first naming was the beginning of a binding process. It was not, Morag explained, in the days that followed the whole thing. There was a second stage, which in the clan tradition involved a formal declaration before witnesses, and a third which involved a physical mark. The formal declaration was optional outside the clan, and the mark, a small thing, traditional iron stain on the wrist, symbolic rather than ceremonial, could be modified. "What is the mark for?" Warren asked. He was sitting at the workbench in the yard while she worked the small forge, and the autumn light was going gold and slant, and everything smelled of iron and turned leaves. "It says that someone has named you and you have agreed to be named," she said, without looking up from the iron. "That you are not alone." She glanced at him. In the old language, the word for it is closer to partnered than to owned. The translation gets confused in common tongue. "I like the original meaning," he said. "Yes, she worked the iron. There is a human custom, a wedding. It is a public thing." "It is," he agreed. "I have been to one, in a river town. There was a priest and a great deal of flowers, and the whole town watched. It is usually something like that." She set down her hammer and looked at him directly. "I would not do that," she said. "Not the flowers and the priest and the whole town. That is not how I would say a true thing." "Then how would you?" he asked. She looked at the iron cooling in her hand. "In front of people we know, people we trust, something honest." She paused. "The ironwork and the words and people who matter." "That sounds right to me," Warren said. He stood. "Brennan Hale has known me since I was 12. He would stand witness." He crossed the yard and leaned against the forge frame. "And the council here registers partnerships regardless of form. It just requires 2 witnesses and a signed record." She looked at him. "You have thought about this?" "I have thought about almost nothing else for 2 weeks," he said honestly. She almost smiled. Actually smiled this time, not the small rough sound or the warmth behind the amber, but a real smile, open and uncomplicated and extraordinary on a face that was generally so controlled, and Warren felt it in his chest the way you feel a fire when you have been cold. "Then let us do it before one of us loses courage," she said. "I am not going to lose courage." "Neither am I," she said. "But let us do it anyway." They did it on the 10th of Harvest Month, which was the last Sunday of the fair, which was Warren's idea because on the last Sunday of the Millhaven Fair, the whole town was in the market square, and there was no way to avoid being seen, and he thought that Morag Ironhide should be seen clearly and completely, as his. He was not wrong. They stood in the market square with Brennan Hale on Warren's left and Gerda Hale, Brennan's wife, on Morag's right, and a small crowd around them that had gathered with the casual interest of a town that had been watching these two with varying degrees of approval and disapproval for 3 weeks, and had arrived at this moment as a kind of collective resolution. Morag had cleaned her leathers and re-braided her hair and looked exactly like herself, tall and green and amber-eyed and magnificent, and Warren had put on his good coat and felt acutely ordinary beside her, and had decided that this was all right. She spoke first because it was clan custom for the namer to speak first, and she spoke in the flat factual tone that was, as Warren had learned, her voice for true things. "I name Warren Hawkins as mine," she said. "Not owned, named. It is different in my tongue." She looked at him. "I choose him because he came back into the flood for me, and because he stood beside me, and because when I speak he listens, and because he makes the quiet feel less like absence and more like rest." She paused. "And because he stood still when I kissed him and did not pretend to be someone other than what he was." There was a murmur through the crowd, not unkind. Warren spoke second, because it was also his custom to speak, and he had decided not to write anything down because if he could not say it from memory it was not worth saying. "I name Morag Ironhide as mine," he said, keeping her words shape because it felt right. "Not owned, named." He kept his eyes on hers. "She shod my horse on the road when she did not know me, out of what I believe was nothing more than not being able to walk past a problem she could fix. She is the most capable person I have ever met and the one most willing to tell me the truth, and she laughs with the sound a branch makes when it cracks in a good frost, which is a sound I did not know I missed until I heard it." He held her gaze. "I would like to be quiet with her for a very long time." The murmur again, warmer this time. Brennan Hale produced the partnership register and the council pen, and they signed it, and Brennan signed and Gerda signed, and it was done. Officially and irreversibly done, in the eyes of the Millhaven Town Council. Morag produced the iron stain, a small vial of dark solution that smelled of iron and something floral, and painted a thin mark on the inside of Warren's left wrist. He had seen her mark. She had worn it since before he met her on her own left wrist, a thin, dark line that he had wondered about and had not asked about because he had known, somehow, that she would tell him when it was time. She had told him. He had said yes without hesitation. She pressed her wrist to his for a moment, mark to mark. In the market square of Millhaven, with the crowd around them and the autumn fair noise and the smell of the fair food and the cold, clean air, Warren Hawkins put both arms around Morag Ironhide and held her, and she held him back, and Gerda Hale made a sound that was unmistakably pleased, and old Brennan Hale said, gruffly and with obvious satisfaction, "Well, finally." The winter was the best winter Warren had spent since childhood. The work yard and the short cold days and the long evenings in the house, which felt right-sized now and warm in a way it had not been before. The snow came early that year and stayed, and the town quieted the way towns do in deep winter, and Warren and Morag settled into the routines that two people build together when they have the patience to build them honestly. She worked the winter smithing work, plowshares and hinges and wagon ironwork, the non-farrier work that came in when there were fewer horses to shoe, and he handled the leather goods and the horse supplies and the occasional repair work. And they ate together every night and talked and were quiet in turns, and it was not, Warren reflected, what he had pictured when he had tried to picture having someone. He had pictured something louder, more dramatic, more effortful. He had not pictured this particular quality of ease, of someone whose presence in a room made the room better without demanding anything from you. "You are thinking," Morag said one evening. She was sharpening tools at the bench and he was reading a trade ledger that he had been reading without seeing for 10 minutes. "I think sometimes," he said. "You have a specific face when it is the good kind of thinking." She ran the file along the chisel. "What is it?" He set the ledger down. "I was thinking that I spent 2 years coming back from the war and trying to want less than I used to want, because wanting things seemed like how you ended up hurt again." He looked at her. "And then you came down the road with my horse." She set the file down and looked at him with the amber eyes. "And now I want more than I have wanted in years," he said. "And it does not frighten me." He shook his head. "I do not know exactly what that means about you, but I think it is the most important thing anyone has done for me." She was quiet for a moment. Then she crossed the room and sat beside him on the bench, close, her shoulder against his, and said, "When I left the clan, I told myself I did not need anyone. That independence was the same as strength." She looked at the wall. "It is not the same thing. I know that now." She leaned into him slightly. "You make me strong in a different way." He put his arm around her and she leaned in, and the fire was going and the cold was outside, and they sat together in the warmth of the house that was the right size. There is a custom in some parts of the South Lowlands, where if a couple has been together through a full winter and still intends to be together come spring, they go to the ridge above their town on the first morning that the frost breaks and watch the sun come up. It is not a formal custom, and it does not have a name in most places, but people do it and they know why they do it. It is a small private ceremony for the transition between seasons, a choosing again. Warren told Morag about this custom on a night in late winter when the snow was still on the ground, but the quality of the cold had changed in the way that tells you, if you have lived in a place long enough, that the change is coming. She listened without speaking. Then she said, "When?" He checked the weather signs, the ice on the rain barrel, the direction of the wind, the particular blue of the sky at dusk for the next 3 days, and on the 4th morning he woke before dawn and said, "Today." She was already awake. They dressed and went out in the dark, before the town was moving, up the road that wound above Millhaven to the ridge, where in autumn the deer moved through the yellow grasses. The frost was still on the ground but soft, yielding, and the air had that not quite cold quality of a day that was going to be the first warm day in months. They stood on the ridge and watched the sun come up. The light came in long and gold over the lowland hills, burning off the last of the night mist, and the valley below them was all autumn stubble fields and bare winter trees and the small squares of farmsteads in the pale thread of the road, and Millhaven was a scattering of rooftops and smoke, and it was very beautiful in the way that ordinary places are beautiful at the right time. "I choose this," Morag said, not looking at him, looking at the valley. Then she turned. "I choose you." "I know," he said. "I want to hear you say it back." He turned to face her on the ridge with the sun coming up behind her and said, "I choose you, Morag Ironhide. I chose you in the market at Kettlemarch, and I chose you on the valley road, and I chose you in the market square, and I will choose you every morning there is a morning for the rest of the time I have." She looked at him for a moment, and then she pulled him in and kissed him in the sunrise on the ridge above Millhaven, and it was the kind of kiss that is not a beginning but a confirmation, the kind that says this is real, and it is permanent, and I know it completely. Below in the valley, the town was starting to wake, smoke rising from chimneys, the first sounds of animals and trade, and the small daily noise of people living their lives. Morag and Warren stood on the ridge above it all for a long time, and there was no hurry to come down, and neither of them was the least bit inclined to hurry. There were still difficulties. Warren had never expected there would not be. There were people in Millhaven who remained cool, some few who were rude. One formal complaint lodged with the town council about the nature of her permit that was reviewed and dismissed. There was an afternoon in early spring when a trader from the north came through and made a scene in the market square about doing business beside a greenblood. And what happened was notable primarily because neither Warren nor Morag had to say a word. Brennan Hale came out of his smithy and Gerda Hale came out of the apothecary, and 3 of the farmers whose plowshares Morag had repaired over winter came in from their errands. And the trader found himself facing something that was not a confrontation so much as a consensus, and left without making a sale. Towns change slowly. They change faster when there is a reason, and the reason in Millhaven's case was that Morag Ironhide was extraordinary at her work, and was responsible for the welfare of at least a dozen horses in the valley and had saved a child's life in the market square. And these were facts that accumulated and eventually outweighed the prejudice for most people, if not for all. There would never be all. There would never be everyone. Warren had long since come to terms with the idea that you cannot make everyone see clearly, and Morag had never expected it. What she expected was fair dealing and the chance to work, and that she had. Spring came with all the force of a spring that follows a hard winter, and the market opened again, and the road circuit started again. And Morag's reputation had grown over the winter, so that there were people coming specifically for her who had heard of her from the towns north of Kettlemarch, and the towns south toward the lowland circuit. She was in demand in a way that she had not been before, and Warren watched this with a particular pleasure that had nothing to do with the business of it. He watched it because he was watching her, watching a person who had traveled alone for 4 years, who had been told in 100 ways large and small that she did not belong, come into a place where she was known and valued and wanted. And he watched what that did to her, which was not that it changed her or softened her or made her something different, but that it allowed her to be what she had always been without the constant expenditure of energy that not belonging requires. He had done that for her, partly. She had done it for herself mostly, but he had made the invitation, and the invitation had mattered, and he was glad he had made it. One afternoon in early spring he came back to the work yard from a supply run to find her at the small forge, working something that was not a horseshoe and not a hinge. She was working with unusual care, checking a small piece of iron against something in her left hand, comparing, adjusting. He looked at the piece in her hand. It was a ring. Not elaborate, plain iron, shaped and fitted, the surface not rough but not polished either. Functional and honest, the way she made everything. She looked up and saw him and did not look away. "For you," she said. He came across the yard and held out his hand, and she set the ring in his palm. It was still slightly warm from the forge. It was perfectly made, the way everything she made was perfectly made. He looked at it for a long moment. "In my father's tradition," she said, The ring was given at the end of the first full year. It is not a formal ceremony. It is just a thing you make and give, and it says that the year was worth it. She paused, that you would make the choice again. I would make it again, he said without looking up from the ring. Every version of it, any day. He put it on. It fit perfectly, of course. She had known his hand. She had been measuring without him knowing, the way she did most things, completely and quietly, and without drawing attention to it. He looked at the ring on his hand and then at her. I do not have the same craft, he said, but I have something. He reached into the bag he had brought back from the supply run and produced a piece of leather he had been working in the evenings for the past month, a braided cuff, tight and intricate, dyed the dark brown she wore, with the wolf pattern he had been learning from studying her own leatherwork. It was not perfect. He was not a leatherworker by training. But it was genuine, and it was made for her hand specifically. She held it and looked at it and looked at him. You made this, she said. I am better with leather than with iron. He paused. It is not what you could have made, but it is what I could make. She put it on her right wrist, beside the iron stain mark on her left. It is better than what I could have made, she said, because you made it. He kissed her there in the yard beside the small forge with the smell of spring and iron around them, and she kissed him back, and neither of them was in any hurry to be anywhere else. By the summer, Morag had added a second forge station in the work yard and taken on a local boy as an apprentice, which was her idea, and one she had implemented so practically that by the time Warren had finished blinking, the boy was already learning to work the bellows. The town had settled around them the way towns settle when they have decided to accept something, not perfectly or without the occasional friction, but genuinely in the way that mattered. People brought their horses to Morag the way they brought their ailments to the healer and their disputes to the council, with the basic trust of people who have decided this is the person for this thing. Brennan Hale said, on a morning in early summer when he came over to borrow a cold chisel and found Morag and Warren eating breakfast together in the yard with the usual comfortable quiet, I have never seen two people so well suited and so little impressed by it. We are impressed, Warren said. We are privately impressed, Morag said. Brennan made a sound that was very close to the sound Morag made when she was almost laughing, and went back to his smithy. The harvest season came around again, and the Kettlemarch Fair was held again on the upper common. They had rebuilt and shifted the main fair to higher ground after the flood, which was a decision that had taken a full year of town council argument but had eventually prevailed. Warren and Morag went, because Kettlemarch was good for horse trade and because it was, in the particular way of places where important things have happened, somewhere they wanted to go back to. They rode the north road into the fair on a bright autumn morning, and the leaves were the same gold and red they had been the year before, and the fair was loud and busy and smelled of roasting pork and spilled cider, and Warren tied Copper to a post near the horse paddock, and turned and found Morag already standing in the entrance of the fairground, looking over the stalls, and the crowd with the same calm, deliberate attention she had used the first time he saw her. She was exactly the same as she had been. The fitted leather bodice, the dark shirt, the tool sling across her back, the braid over her shoulder. She had been exactly this for the entire year he had known her, and she would be exactly this when the year turned again, and he found this enormously comforting. She looked over her shoulder and found him looking. "Stop staring," she said. "No," he said. She made the sound that was her laugh, the branch cracking good frost sound, and turned back to the fair. He walked up beside her, and she put her arm through his without ceremony. The way you do something that is already established, already ordinary, already precisely what it should be. The year had changed them in the ways that years change people who have decided to be changed, not into different people, but into more fully themselves, shaped by the friction of two lives pressed close together, and discovering that the shape that results is better than either of the shapes before. Warren was less careful about hoping for things. He still worked hard and kept quiet hours and was not a man who needed to be the loudest voice in any room, But the wariness that had been part of his quiet for 2 years had gone, replaced by something more open and more willing to be surprised. Morag was not less herself. She was never going to be less herself. But there was something in the way she moved through Kettlemarch, through any place, that was different from the solitary quality of someone who is used to being on their own. She had always been self-contained. Now she was self-contained and also, specifically and visibly, not alone, and she wore it differently. Not softened, not changed, just full in a way that the year before she had been guarded. They found the spot where Morag had first come down the road. Warren had been wondering if he would recognize it, and he did, because the road bent there in a particular way, and there was a distinctive oak at the verge. It was just a road. It was also in the way that places where important things happen are not just themselves, something more than a road. He said nothing. She did not say anything either. She squeezed his arm slightly, the way you acknowledge something without needing to name it. They walked into the fair. They set up their stalls beside each other in the craft row, and the day was good. And in the afternoon, a string of horses came in from the eastern drovers and kept Morag busy for 3 hours straight, which was exactly the kind of busy she liked. Warren sold most of his stock by midday and spent the afternoon doing what he had done the year before, watching her work. But now, it was not the watching of a man trying to memorize someone he was afraid of losing sight of. It was the watching of a man who simply loved watching someone he loved do the thing they were best at. In the evening, they ate at the same trestle table outside the inn where they had eaten the first night. It was the same table, more or less, though the upper common was not quite the same geography as the lower fairground had been before the flood. It was close enough. Same bench, Warren said. Approximately. She was eating with the same thoroughness as the year before. You told me you had not eaten. I told you I had not yet eaten. That was an honest answer. You could have said you were hungry. I could have said many things. She looked at him across the table. I was deciding whether to, he smiled. And you decided to eat with me. I decided you were worth the risk, she said. She said it simply, the way she said all true things. I had seen your horse. I had seen what kind of animal he was, well kept, well loved, not overworked. The horse was a good reference for the man. You judged me by my horse. I judged you by the evidence available, she said. The horse was excellent evidence. He laughed, a real full laugh, the kind that had been rarer than it should have been for the previous 2 years of his life and was now considerably less rare. Well, he said, I am glad Copper speaks well of me. He would have been lame on that shoe, she said. It was very close. I know, he looked at his cider. I think about that sometimes. What would have happened if you had passed him on the road, if you had been looking the other way? I do not pass a lame horse, she said. No, you do not, he looked at her. You also do not pass a man standing in a fairground looking at a horse he thought he had lost. She held his gaze, amber and steady. No, she said. It seems I do not. Above the upper common, the ridge where she had watched from last year was visible in the evening light, that same ridge where she had stood with her tools and observed the road below, waiting to see his face when he saw his horse come home with a new shoe. He had not known at the time that she had watched. She had told him in the winter, matter-of-factly, the way she told him everything. I watched from the ridge. I wanted to see your face. He had asked what she saw. She had said, I saw that you were glad. Not just about the horse. I saw that you were glad about the work, that someone had cared enough. He had thought about that for a long time. About a woman alone on a ridge with a farrier's tools sling on her back, watching a man she did not know yet react to an act of uncalculated kindness, looking for evidence that the world contained people worth knowing. He had been, that day, exactly what she was looking for. Not impressive, not remarkable, not brave or extraordinary, just someone who saw a thing done with care and was genuinely moved by it. Just someone who went back into the fair and said, I did not get your name. The ridge was golden in the autumn light. Morag was eating cider bread and looking at the fair around them with the deep amber calm of someone who is exactly where they should be. Warren Hawkins, former cavalry sergeant, leather and horse goods merchant, quiet man of Millhaven, reached across the table and put his hand over hers. She turned her hand over without looking up from the fair. They sat there in the last of the autumn light with the fair noise around them. The same fiddles from the same direction, the same smell of roasting pork, the same cold-edged air that tasted of coming winter and harvest both. And the year was behind them, and another year was ahead, and it was not a small thing to be sitting here in this particular warmth. It was, Warren thought, looking at the ridge and the golden light on the grass and the woman across from him with her hand in his, the absolute opposite of nothing. It was so far from nothing that nothing barely made sense as a concept anymore. He had come back from the war with empty hands and a conviction that quiet was the best he could ask for. He had not been wrong about wanting quiet. He had been wrong about what quiet was for. Quiet was not the same as alone. Quiet was not the same as having nothing to protect. Morag looked at him, amber eyes in the gold light, and she smiled, the real one, the open one, rare and extraordinary and entirely hers. "Stop thinking," she said. "It is a fair day, be here." "I am here," he said. "Then be glad you are here." "I am," he said. He squeezed her hand. "I very much am." The fair ran 3 more days, and they were good days, busy and cold and bright, with the kind of high autumn sky that felt like it had been polished. On the last day, walking out with empty stalls and full wagon, and the horse trade settled, and the cob hitched, and Copper following on a lead rope, they passed the north road where the story had started, and Warren looked at Copper's left front hoof. The shoe she had put on there on the road. The first shoe, the one that had started everything, had been replaced twice over the year. Horses need new shoes every 6 weeks. The shoe on his hoof now was not the same shoe, but it was her work every time. Every shoe she had put on that hoof since the road. He thought about this, about the way things continued, about how something as small and practical as a nail in a horseshoe had been the first word of a language he was still learning to speak. She came up beside him and took Copper's lead rope from his hand without asking, because she had been doing that for a year and she would do it for as long as they were traveling together, and she checked the shoe with a practiced glance and said, "He is due in another week. I will do it before we leave Millhaven." "I know," Warren said. "You always do." She looked at him. "Yes," she said, "I do." The road south went easy under the autumn sky, the ridge at their backs and Millhaven ahead and the winter coming behind them, and neither of them was in any hurry at all.